All right, so last week had a little bomb go off in most people's brains. That's okay. Not exactly how I wanted it to go, but you know, I'm a perfectionist, so I'm always going to look at things and say it's kind of off. But here's what we're getting into today. I called this the meta narrative of the Bible, and the subtitle is Babel and Cosmic Geography. We're going to look at some Bible stories today that we think we know what they mean. We haven't peeled back all the layers. All right, so meta-narrative, great observation. If I read to you the story of Joseph, right? Most of us know it, right? He gets sold into slavery. He goes to Egypt. He actually works his way up to be the second most powerful person in the kingdom, right? That is a narrative. But on top of that, there is this meta-narrative of things that God was orchestrating through Joseph's life to accomplish his purposes on earth. For instance, without Joseph, there was nobody to rescue Jacob's family from the famine. And because of that, if that would have happened, God's line or his inheritance would have perished on the face of the earth. And God ain't about to let that happen. Right? Okay. Let's go through the assumptions again. I'm just going to read through them. We're not going to explain them this time. If you guys have questions about that, you can text me or talk about it doing Q&D or see me after. It's all good. Okay? Remember, the Bible doesn't hurt anybody who reads it. Oh, that's on me. Sorry, Taylor. There we go. The Bible will not hurt anybody who reads it. Okay? We should read it like a novel, not a textbook. Okay? This doesn't have math formulas in it. A plus B equals C. This has a story. Stories are messy. Stories have details. Details are important. Okay? Details are important. Remember, the Bible was written for us, right? We gain the benefit of it, but it was not written to us. It was written to a bunch of people who did not have cell phones. They did not have automobiles. They did not have our world perspective and view. So when we approach this text, we can't look at it like a 21st century American. We have to look at it like a first century Jewish person. And when you do that, you unlock not only more of the secrets of the text, but you'll unlock more of the beauty of the story. Okay? All right? The weird parts and the boring parts are all important, and there will be many weird and boring parts today. Okay? And they will all get linked together. All right? So, to receive everything that the Bible and God has for us, we have to approach the text from the mindset of the author's intended audience, okay? And then this is my thing. Remember, you guys have homework. Your job isn't just to listen to me and think, oh, well, he's teaching us, he knows it, so whatever. I'm just going to let it be. And no, you need to go and actually look to see if what I'm saying is true, and you need to wrestle it out on your own. You don't have to agree with me. You don't have to agree with what's being said here. Okay? You don't. But don't just hear it and turn your brain off and go home and forget about it. Actually engage with the text. If I got anybody to actually go home and read their Bible last week, I was successful. Right? And that's the goal. Okay? This isn't like American sermonology where if the preacher says it, it has to be true. No, it's not. I'm offering you a suggestion of how to interpret things, and I'm going to do my best to convince you that this probably is the way that you should go. You can take it or leave it, okay? All right, let's roll. So, recap from last week, okay? We talked about Elohim, okay? We talked about how God and God-like spirit beings, there's more than just one. They have different functions. They serve different purposes, and they all have different powers. God created a family of these beings. God also created a family of human beings to serve a specific purpose, okay? Some of the Elohim have disobeyed God, right? Person we call Satan definitely did, right? That was part of the first rebellion. Fallen angels, as we talked about last week, definitely did. That was part of the second rebellion. And this week we're going to kind of focus on the third rebellion. But number 3 is really important. Yahweh has taken drastic measures to address this rebellion. Drastic. Okay? Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson were known as deists because they thought, oh, God did all this stuff before, but now he's away and, he's not really interested in directly acting in earth again. I would say to them, maybe God had to directly intervene in earth a little more than he would have liked to because he's in the middle of a war that he will win. And the war was at a critical point. Okay? And we're going to look at some more of that here today. So, remember, God had multiple families. God witnessed both of these everybody in these families. Well, I shouldn't say everybody. Not all the Elohim have rebelled, but rebellion in both families. Okay? All right, so we talked about Eden a little bit last week. We actually have to pull that into Babel a little bit too, so we're going to unpack that a little today. Okay, but Babel, who are the characters? Humans, sons of God. Okay? So, some of the Elohim, some of the human beings. And some of you might be saying, wait a minute, I know Babel pretty good. I don't remember a sons of God part in there. It's underlying. We'll check that out, okay? Here's what happened. Humans refused to follow Yahweh's leadership. Refused. Again, right? The flood was supposed to take care of this. It's happening again, okay? Also, the sons of God have usurped Yahweh's lordship. We're going to talk about that too. Consequences. The world is divided into nations. And every nation in the world gets a deity, or what we would say is an Elohim that's responsible for stewarding that particular group of people, teaching them about God, teaching them what is right, teaching them what is wrong, and enacting justice. Okay? And what we'll see is, and this is a truth that we need to learn, whenever humans or Elohim besides God are given too much power, we usually screw it up. We usually screw it up, right? It's part of our nature. I'm not saying we're all bad or we're all good or any of that, but power corrupts and absolute power corrupts. Absolutely. Right? Right? All right. So let's dig in here. I have a few more stories, but I wanted to put them out because another comment I received last week was, man, there's a lot of stories, and I had a hard time referencing them all. So I'm going to spend more time in the context of some of them, so hopefully it's a little easier to understand. Okay? So this comes from Ezekiel. All right. Moreover, the word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, raise a lamentation over the king of Tyre. Sounds like a human, doesn't it? Let's go on with the text. Thus says the Lord God, you are a signet of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. Is he talking about a human? Let's go on. You are in Eden. Okay. Can't be a human, right? Cannot be a human. We're in the middle of a metaphor here, right? Okay? You were in the garden of God. Every precious stone was your covering. Sardis, topaz, diamond, beryl, blah, 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 blah. They go through the list. By the way, this list is very similar to the breastplate that's worn by the high priest. Not exact, but very similar, okay? And there are things with that, but we don't have time for that this morning. All right, it was crafted in gold, settings in engraving, and on the day you were created, they were prepared. You were an anointed guardian cherub. Okay? Cherub. It is a office. It is a job description. Okay? We're going to need to pull on that thread a little bit later, so remember that. I placed you were on the holy mountain of God. Wait a minute, I thought he was in Eden. Eden, and from an ancient perspective, we think of gardens where? In valleys, right? We're in the middle of two mountains, Cumberland Valley. The valley is fertile, the mountains are not, right? Rocky, things don't grow there. That's not how they looked at Eden. Eden was a mountain, and on top of the mountain was the garden of God, and that's where God came down and interacted with human creation. Now, an important point we need to talk about. Eden was the only place that there was perfection from a biblical standpoint. You can't say, I believe in the Bible fully and I'm going to trust what it says, and then go and say the whole world was perfect at the creation, okay? The Bible just doesn't say that. If you want to make that leap theologically, I'm perfectly okay with it. knock yourself out, okay? But that's not what the Bible says, okay? And when we go beyond what the Bible says, that's kind of where we can get ourselves into trouble, okay? So, Eden's on this mountain. Does it say it anywhere else in the Bible? Glad you asked. Absolutely. Isaiah 66. This is kind of a prophecy of the future, right? And they shall bring brothers from all nations and an offering to the Lord on horses and in chariots and in litters and on mules and on dromedaries. Those are other pack animals, okay? To my holy mountain, Jerusalem. I picked this one on purpose because this is where God associates the Edenic place with Jerusalem, okay? Kind of gets into a gray area there, but I'm firmly convinced that Eden was where Jerusalem was. Why do you think all the Nephilim went and surrounded that mountain after they knew Jacob moved on to Egypt? They knew where it was. They knew God was trying to get back to it, okay? Like I said, that's just me, though. Can't prove it completely. All right, let's hop into the story here. Genesis 9, we have to talk about this. So, the flood's over. Noah sacrifices. There's a weird little thing with Canaan, but we're not going to talk about it here. God says, be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. God is bent on transforming the earth to be Eden totally. That's what he wants. That's his end goal. His enemies know this, and his enemies will do anything to keep it from happening or prolong it from happening. Okay? When we move on to Genesis 10, this is the part of the Bible everybody starts to roll their eyes in. Oh my goodness, why are they putting all these things in here, right? Because it's a list of names. And here is a chart, a graphic organizer, so to speak, for you teachers in the room, of the different table of nations. Okay? That's what it's known as to Jews. Okay? So we have Shem, we have Ham, we have Japheth, and they have a bunch of kids. I'm not going to go over all the names. It is quite droll and boring. However, I will say this. If you start to look up the meanings of the names, you can start to piece some things together, okay? We don't have time for that today, though. We can talk about that later if you want. I did box one person at the bottom. One person is not in the table, but it's kind of like a break between two portions of the table. They start to talk about this person called Nimrod. Nimrod, very popular figure in Mesopotamian literature, okay? And remember, the Bible was kind of put together when they're in that exile period. So they're very aware of who Nimrod is. And the biblical writers, and I will be the first to admit, Nimrod being inserted here was probably an edit by the Jewish people at some point in time because they wanted to point out the difference between the greatness of God and the other Elohim. That's what I'm postulating here. So let's check out what they say about Nimrod here. All right? Nimrod literally means rebellion. It can also mean the valiant. Note the dualism. It is not a Jewish word. They took it from Mesopotamian literature and they used it directly in the text. Now, some of you might be saying, why the heck does he have a constellation on the board? Nimrod can mean a mighty hunter. Orion is known as the mighty hunter of the skies. It's not accidental, okay? Nimrod is constantly associated with Orion. In fact, the place where that shield is, oftentimes there's a lion, a slain lion in his hand from more ancient pictures and art forms. That's not accidental. Nimrod's also associated with, in Hebrew text, the Antichrist. He was known as the first Antichrist if you read through the Midrash. Why? Because he's the first person that created a one-world government, okay? So I went and I pulled some stuff from the Jewish Encyclopedia, okay? They kind of condensed the Midrash down to make it palatable for basically Americans, all right? Nimrod is the prototype of a rebellious people. His name being interpreted as he who made all the people rebellious against God. Interesting, okay? He is identified with Cush, that's his father, and Amraphel. That's his name associated with him later on after Babel, okay? He was the first hunter, and consequently, he first introduced the eating of meat by man. I thought that was interesting. Shannon, I just highlighted that specifically for you. He was also the first to make war with other peoples, as ever noted in Scripture, okay? Now, it gets even more interesting. Now, I want to make this very clear. This is not in the Bible, but this is in their heads when they're writing and reading the Bible, okay? So, when we read about Nimrod, it needs to be in our head as well. Check this out. According to another account, when Nimrod was 18 years old, war broke out between the Hamites, right? So the sons of Ham, and his kinsmen. His kinsmen and the Japhites. The latter were victorious. So the Japhites won or were winning the battle, and then Nimrod enters with his clan and wipes them all out. Okay? Small army, he attacked, he defeated them, after which he was made king over all the peoples of the earth, appointing Terah his minister. Terah is Abraham's father. Okay? Terah is Abraham's father. Check this out. It was then, elated by so much glory, that Nimrod changed his behavior towards Yahweh. Pre this time, he was actually a worshiper of God. After he became king of all the earth, as pride does, it causes behavioral changes. Okay? Then this is where it gets crazy. He became a most flagrant idolater. I love the vocabulary there. When informed of Abraham's birth, he requested that Terah sell his son to him so that he could be sacrificed. What? What's going on here? Terah hid Abraham in his stead, and in his stead he brought Nimrod, the child of a slave. I'm not saying that that's particularly kosher, but I'm not saying that this is true, but this is definitely in their minds. He is a child sacrificer, right? And Nimrod dashed this child to pieces. And that's going to be really important because we're going to look at a tower and what ancient cultures do on these towers, and it's going to link up here, okay? Nimrod is generally to be considered the one who put the idea in people's heads, and actually oversaw its construction. He was the foreman of this tower of Babel, okay? God said, I made Nimrod great, and then he built a tower in order that he might rebel against me. Building this tower is seen as rebellion in their eyes. And we're going to talk about why that is, or at least I'll hypothesize why that is, and you guys can make up your own mind, okay? The rabbis consistently call the tower throughout literature the house of Nimrod, okay? It's considered a house of idolatry, and the owners abandoned it in a time of peace, right? God came down and he confused the nations. All right? So, the house of Nimrod, interesting. It's appeared on many places over the earth. Do you know how many pyramid structures we have on this planet that can't be explained? There's the one we know. I like the sunset. That's why I chose it. Right? There's the one we know. It is part of a temple complex. Okay? There's another one. This is an artistic rendering of the ziggurat from Babylon. I think this one is the most telling story because if you are familiar with the study of antiquities, okay, one of the 7 great wonders of the ancient world was the pyramids, but another one was called the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Hanging gardens. How do you get hanging gardens? It has to be built off of something that is tall. What's tall in Babylon that has a garden growing off of it? I can't paint the picture anymore. They're not original. They're trying to recreate Eden in their own image. They're trying to recreate Eden in their own image. And not to think that this is all Euro or Middle East centric. We have those on this half of the world, all over the place. And because these were discovered later, we also know that these towers were associated with child sacrifice. You could say, oh, well, they stole it from each other, or maybe they all got it from a common descendant. You have to make up your mind about that one, okay? I didn't have time to really go through it. There is an appendix after this, so when I post the slides, if you guys want to look through it, there's tons of stuff. But high places is mentioned over 50 times just from Samuel to the end of Chronicles. High places, high places, high places. It's mimicking this. They built temple structures at the highest place they could find and started doing child sacrifice and different types of things. God got the last laugh, though. There's a king called Josiah, and we think it's kind of cool because he was only 7 years old when he came to the throne, and he found the book of the law, and he was actually brave enough to have it read to the congregation. He demanded they assemble. He held the first Passover since before David. We don't even know if David held Passover. It's not written, so we don't know. We assume, but we just don't know, okay? And he got so lit up by this word that he heard, he went and he annihilated the places. And he was petty about it too. He actually took the dead bones of their priests and burned it on the altar, which was considered sacrilege. You couldn't do that. He just eviscerated everything. And it was saw as good, right? Because you're doing away with this thing. It actually has, there's some verses, and I highlighted them, where he actually went and just destroyed places where it was known that people offered their children to Molech. And let's be honest, abortions didn't happen chemically back then. You had the baby and then it took place. And we kind of look at them as the monsters. Just a thought. Just a thought. Okay? Why did all these pyramid shapes appeal over the earth? Here's why. In ancient culture, if you built this tower, it was assumed that you could summon your god. In fact, they made it kind of nice. They had a little rest area, a couch. They would always prepare food, and they thought the food that gods ate were human beings. And we talked about that last week. Remember, the Nephilim were associated with cannibalism, and that's the first time it was ever mentioned. The thread is coming back here as well, okay? So, let's get into Genesis 11 and see what happens. So here's all the Bible has to say about this, and remember, it's making you draw on this supposed knowledge you have in your head, okay? So, the whole earth had one language and the same words. Stop. Who on earth would have that sentence saying they have the same language and the same words together? That makes no sense. I know the Bible repeats itself for a reason, but no intelligent human being who puts things together is going to put that in the same sentence. Let's look at what language really means. Okay? Language, safa. Okay? It can mean lip. That's the most common translated form. It can mean language. It can mean speech. But then it gets really interesting. It can also mean shore, bank, the brim, the edge, the border. Where do we have borders? The nearest one I know is 5 miles south, right? And it was an important one because supposedly if you were a certain hue of skin and you crossed that border at a certain time, you were free, right? Borders matter. So, I'm just going to suggest here that perhaps they weren't so unintelligent when making this sentence. Perhaps we just don't know all the context and we haven't translated that as correctly as we should have. What if it said, now the whole earth had one border and the same language? Right? Remember, it says in the Midrash, Nimrod created one nation, one kingdom on earth. I think that's what they're alluding to. You don't have to go with me, but it helps me make a lot more sense of everything that's going on here. Okay? As people migrated from the east, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there, and they said to one another, come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly. That's how they made bricks back then, right? And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. Now, I highlighted this because, and this is kind of funny. Archaeologists, that when they excavate and try to dig into these tower complexes, because, they've been around a while, they're kind of dilapidated and falling apart in some respects. They actually found pitch mixed in with the bitumen to actually make the mortar for these things. The only other time we've seen pitch used in the Bible is when Noah used that to seal the ark. I wonder what they were afraid of. Perhaps another flood? Come, let us build a city for ourselves and a tower with its tops to the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth. If you knew it was going to happen, why did you do it in the first place? I don't understand the rationale for that, except with pride corrupts. It really does. It makes you think that you're more than you are, and guess what happened? They built this tower to call down a god. Guess who came down? God came, and it didn't go well. The Lord said, behold, they are one people and they have one language. The exact same word that we just talked about, Safa. Okay? And this is only the beginning of what they will do. And nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. I don't like the way the English Standard Version translated that. The King James kind of fits in more with my argument here. So I'm going to take liberty. King James says, nothing will be restrained from them. AKA, they won't have the power to stop. Right? For which they have imagined to do. And remember, back in Genesis 6, it said the thoughts of man were constantly what? Good and flowery and pure and lovely? No. Right? God's worried about how fast the interaction with Elohim is causing mankind to be drawn to the evil side of freedom. Right? We all get up. We all have choices to make every day. We can choose good. We can also choose bad. Right? It's all part and parcel with freedom. Now, come, let us go down there and confuse their language. Safa is used again. Okay? So that they may not understand one another's speech. I'm going to say this. So that they may. All are not words that are directly translated. The only words that are directly translated were understand one another's speech. So, it could say, if you were translating this, let's go down there and confuse their nations and make their speech undiscernible. So the Lord dispersed them from there all over the face of the earth, and they stopped building. Okay? The place was called Babel because this is where the Lord confused the languages of all the earth. Jewish people look at this and say, this is where the Lord created the nations of all the earth. Okay? And of course, I have more evidence. Deuteronomy 32. Matthew really wants me to show this video. All right. This is where God's kind of going over the whole game plan right before they step into the promised land, right? So it's a lot of review, right? Deuteronomy means say again, okay? So when the Most High gave the nations their inheritance, he gave them an inheritance? It sounded like a punishment to me. Very interesting. God gives us what we ask for a lot more than we think. And usually when we get exactly what we ask for, usually not a good thing, and it's usually a punishment. And think about it. If you're asking a god to come down, or what I think was happening, they were trying to summon other gods. They were trying to summon the fallen angels to come down again. Remember, it said they came down before the flood and after. Nimrod is also considered a Nephilim. Okay? He was the child of a fallen angel. He's only Noah's great-grandson. We're back into it really quick. Okay? So, he divided mankind. He fixed the borders of the people according to the number of the sons of God. In your or most Bibles, this will say the sons of Israel. That doesn't make sense. Did Israel exist at the time of Babel? Was there 12 nations on that table? So what's going on? When they found the Dead Sea Scrolls, they found the oldest copies of the text that we have. And in the oldest copies of the text, this was literally sons of God. That's why some of the more modern translations have made that change. And they'll put a footnote in about it for you to read and check it out. Okay? But it doesn't make any sense if it's the sons of Israel. It really doesn't. Jacob wasn't even born yet. Okay? It makes a lot more sense to look at it from this perspective. Okay? The Lord's portion is his people. Jacob is his heritage. Okay? So God gives 70 or 72, depending on which version of the Bible you read, nations to 70 Elohim, and their job is to govern well. Right? Govern well. I'm going to take my portion, and through my portion, I will fix this. But what happened? They screwed it up, right? They screwed it up. And we'll talk about that too. We had Psalm 82 last week. It's going to come into play here again. And I'm going to have the middle section there because the middle section really shows what their sin was. Okay? But at Babel, humans demonstrated they didn't want Yahweh as their God. They didn't want to follow his commands. Remember, he said, disperse. Go into the world, be fruitful and multiply. And what did they do? No, we're going to stay in one place. Like a petulant child, right? And God ended up dispersing them. Okay? Every Elohim was assigned to a nation as a regional steward. Here is a map. If they could draw a map of the table of nations, there's what it looks like. And that's going to be very important come New Testament time. Very important. Okay? Not all 70 names are on there. Canaan had a lot of children. They all couldn't fit on the map in the wee little place that they're crammed into. Okay? But this is the worldview of an Israelite. They think this is the whole world. They don't know about Alaska. They don't know about Cuba, South America, Panama. This is their worldview. Okay? So when Jesus says to them, go to the whole world and make disciples of all nations, they weren't thinking about Alaska or Greenland or Iceland. They're thinking about this. And that's going to come up hopefully very quickly here. Okay? They were to govern well, direct humans towards Yahweh as the one true God, right? But instead, what happened? They coveted the worship and they started becoming regional deities. And we have a lot in our Bible about how God deals with regional deities that try to mess with his inheritance, right? Okay? Let's talk about this. Psalm 82, right? The divine counsel, the gods that he holds in judgment. Here's what he says to them. Give justice to the weak and the fatherless. Maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute. Rescue the weak and the needy. Deliver them from the hand of the wicked. They have neither knowledge nor understanding, and they walk around in darkness. Therefore, all the foundations of the earth are shaken. Dan and I were talking about this a few nights ago. It says in James, right? What is true religion? It is to what? Look after the widow and the orphan. That's all he says. That's what they didn't do. They didn't do justice to the most destitute in their society. And he pronounces judgment. You are sons of the Most God, but like men you shall die. You shall fall like any prince. Arise, O God, and judge the earth, for you shall inherit the nation. The psalmist is calling out that God's going to take these nations back. He disinherited them. He wants them back at a very specific time. Okay? Also, it's useful to note, arise. We have Hebrew text, so this kind of gets lost, but when you're a Jew in Jesus' time, you're not reading the Hebrew Bible unless it's on the scroll on Shabbat. The Bible you're reading is the Greek Bible. The Greek word for arise is the exact same word as used in all four Gospels to talk about Jesus' resurrection. Arise, O God, and judge the earth. The judgment of a lot of things actually happens at the resurrection. Okay? It actually happens at the resurrection. And I know there's a lot of consternation and angst because you're thinking, but wait, there's still so much wrong with the world. That's right. But we don't understand Jewish thought with prophecy is not a one and done fulfillment. There's this, it's here and not yet. Like the kingdom of God. Jesus walked around and said, the kingdom of God is at hand. Yes, and not yet. Right? Yes, and not yet. Okay? So here's what I want you to get. Ground, territory matters. It matters to them. It's going to matter. We're going to see crazy things in the Bible like, what do these people care? This is dumb. But it mattered to them because they had this worldview that wherever you were on the planet, you were under the domain of that regional deity because they were given charge over it. Okay? And it happens in multiple places. I just have a few listed here. We could talk about Exodus all day, all right? But I've condensed it down to this one just because I like what Pharaoh's people say to him at the end. Okay, so this is where he's Moses is making pronouncement with the locust, right? And what he says is just harsh. It really is. So Moses and Aaron went into Pharaoh and said to him, "Thus says the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, how long will you refuse to humble yourself before me?" Once again, pride making its self known, right? "Let my people go that they may serve me. For if you refuse to let my people go, behold, tomorrow I will bring locusts into your country. They shall cover the face of the land so that no one can see the land. They shall eat what is left to you after the hail. They shall eat every tree of yours that grows in the field. They shall fill your houses and the houses of your servants and all the Egyptians, as neither your fathers nor your grandfathers have seen. And from that day they came on the earth until this day." AKA, I'm going to do something you have never seen. You might be sorry. And they turned and walked away, right? Pharaoh's servants turned to him and said, "How long shall this man be a snare to us?" AKA, my translation, "What are you doing? Let them go." And here's the best part. "Do you not yet understand that Egypt is ruined?" Why? What is God doing? There's 10 plagues, right? God is systematically showing his superiority to all of their regional deities. Systematically. He saved Ra for last, because Ra was the big daddy of them all. He's not greater than me. He's the sun god. Check this out. You won't see the sun. Right? And we know that Yahweh is greater. That's why it says most high, most high, most high in the Bible, right? Because these are Elohim. They're spiritual entities, but they're not God. God has unique attributes. He is the only creator. He is the only one that always makes the right choices. Okay? Here we go. This is a good one. Okay, so this is from Samuel, right? They made this thing when they were in the desert called the Ark of the Covenant, and the Ark supposedly contained the essence of God, or the presence, right? And we sing about presence a lot today. So, the Philistines captured the ark and brought it from Ebenezer to Ashdod. Ashdod was one of the 5 cities. They had 5 kings of the 5 cities, and they each controlled their own regional area. Okay? So the Philistines took the ark of God and brought it into the house of Dagon and set it up beside Dagon, right? And this is their entity. This is their territorial Elohim. All right? If you look for pictures of Dagon, it like has a dude's head, and it's like being swallowed by a fish. Very Jonah-esque. In our mindset, but it basically was a half man, half fish kind of statue that they worship. Okay? So the people of Ashdod rose early the next day, and behold, Dagon had fallen face downward on the ground before the ark. This is Jewish humor at its best. Right? Oh, you think you won? Look who's bowing now. So what does any good priest do? Oh, Dagon is bowing before the ark? No. They put Dagon back in his place. They rose early the next morning, and behold, Dagon had fallen face downward on the ground before the ark again. This time his head was severed, and both his hands were lying cut off on the threshold. We look at that as a nice children's story, but here's the interesting part. We read over this all the time. This is why the priest of Dagon and all who enter the house of Dagon do not tread on the threshold of Dagon in Ashdod to this day. Why? Why is that detail in the Bible? Because ground matters. Yahweh slayed Dagon on that place. It's his territory now. Do you see what they're thinking and what they're getting at when they write these things? Ground matters. And it mattered to Gentiles. These aren't Jewish people. They don't have to believe that Yahweh's this or that and the third. They're not responsible for that, but they do. They recognize that the God of Israel is greater than the God of the Philistines. And I cut this part out, but afterwards, Ashdod's like, hey, who wants the ark? Right? They tried to send it to Gath. Every place the ark went, people broke out with tumors almost instantaneously. It was chaos. They sent it back to Judah, and it stayed in this guy's house until David brought it back to the tabernacle in Jerusalem, right? The hand of God was heavy against the people of Ashdod, and he terrified and afflicted them with tumors, both Ashdod and its territory. God is serious about his people and his territory. He will defend it. Let's look at Samuel 26. There's a lot of stuff here. I put the whole context in because it seems like Saul's always chasing David and David's always getting away, and we kind of confuse the stories. This is one where Saul actually takes 3,000 guys and surrounds him. So David takes one of his guys. Let's see, who is it? Yeah, it's Abishai. Abishai should be familiar. He's one of the ones that killed one of the giants last week after David was king. Okay? I think he's also the guy that wrestled the lion in the pit. Wasn't he? It was one. Anyways, one of David's guys wrestled a lion in a pit. You know, have to have all these manly stories here to make you think you're great or something. Anyways, so they go into the tent or where Saul slept, and they stole his spear and his water jug. Okay, and then there's this little altercation here between David and Abner, and I'm going to pick up reading here in 13. All right, so 1 Samuel 26:13. David went over to the other side and stood far off on the top of a hill with great space in between them, right? He's not taking any chances. Okay? And David called to the army, and Abner, son of Ner, said, and by the way, Abner was the captain, right? He was in charge of the army, Saul's right-hand man. Will you not answer, Abner? And then Abner answered, who are you that calls to the king? And David said to Abner, are you not a man? Who is like you in Israel? Why have you not kept watch over your lord the king? For one of the people came in to destroy the king, your lord. So he's basically calling Abner out for not doing his job, right? Okay. This is the thing you have done, and it is not good. As the Lord lives, you deserve to die, because you have not kept watch over your lord, the Lord's anointed. Now see where the king's spear is, and the jar of water that was at his head. And when Saul hears this, he's like, you're David. He recognizes his voice, right? And David said, it is my voice, O Lord the king, or my Lord the king. Why does my Lord pursue his servant, right? So we're going through this again. And here's the interesting part. For they have driven me out this day, that I should have no share in the heritage of the Lord, saying, go serve other gods. Remember what David has to do in the end. He actually has to go live in Philistia. And it's paining him because he feels like he's being cut off from Yahweh's ground. He feels like he can't worship because it's not Yahweh's ground. Now, I'm not saying he's right, but if this is how he thinks and feels, it would make sense why this detail is even there. Because ground to them matters. Now, Therefore, let not my blood fall to the earth away from the presence of the Lord. He's seriously worried about dying, not in his home territory. Ground matters. That's a Jewish person's perspective. There's some more here. I'll skip over the rest. Naaman. I was really tempted to bring in my kids the Jesus Story Bible, because they do a pretty good job with this. Okay, but Naaman was a Syrian general. He was the second-hand man in the land, and he had leprosy. And he did everything he could to get rid of his leprosy, right? Went to see Sayers. He prayed to his god Ramon in the temple at Damascus. Nothing would work. Well, they had this Jewish girl who was a slave that they took from Israel. And she overhears her master is having problems with leprosy. So she goes, would that my Lord would that my Lord were a prophet in Samaria, he would cure him of leprosy. Basically, she said, hey, Elisha's in Israel. Go see him. He can cure this. So Naaman got his entourage and went, okay? Just because a little girl in his household told him to go. He was that desperate for a miracle, okay? So he goes to the king of Syria and said, go now, I will send a letter to the king of Israel, right? Because usually when opposing armies and their commanders come in, people don't like it, right? If the highest general in China made a visit to our land with 10,000 troops, we'd probably take notice, right? That's kind of how it works. Okay, so he sent a letter saying, hey, this isn't a military thing. We just want to see if we can get a cure here. All right, and he brought the letter to the king of Israel, and it reads, when this letter reaches you, know that I have sent Naaman, my servant, that you may cure him of his leprosy. And the king's kind of like, am I God to kill and to make alive, that this man would send me word that I can cure this man of his leprosy? He's being really sarcastic here, and this is ridiculous. I can't fix him, okay? He thinks he's trying to start a battle with him because, oh, if I can't cure him of his leprosy, that just gives you an excuse to come in here and take all our stuff, right? It's kind of how human thinking goes, all right? But when Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, he said to the king, why have you torn your clothes? Let him come now to me, that he may know there is a prophet in Israel. So Naaman takes his entourage. They go to visit Elisha. So Naaman came with his horses and chariots and stood at the door of Elisha's house, right? He's like, all right, I'm going to get to see the prophet. And here's what Elisha does. He sent a messenger, right? So Elisha sent an angel, right? Servant. Naaman wanted the red carpet treatment. He got a servant. And the servant comes down and says, go wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh shall be restored, and you shall be clean. Naaman does not take this well. Naaman was angry and went away, saying, behold, I thought that he would surely come out to me and stand and call upon the name of the Lord his God and wave his hand over the place and cure the leper, right? He had a vision of how his healing would come, or a way that he thought it would go. And that's not how it went. Good thing he had some good servants here, as we'll see, but check this out. Are not Abna and Pharpar, rivers in Damascus, better than the waters of Israel? Right? If Kathy told somebody who had boils to go wash in the Capcom River in West Virginia, we might realize the kind of thing that's going on here. Oh, I'm going to a place that's... Yeah, exactly. The West Virginia thought process. We have all heard the jokes. Everybody's looking at me like I'm making fun. We know, right? Okay. All right. That's exactly what's going on here. It's just like, I have to come to this dirt town and I'm going to go wash in a dirt river. Come on, right? Pride and hubris to the core. His servants came near and said, my father, is it a great word that the prophet has spoken to you? AKA, they just told you to go dip in a river. It's not like they told you to do something impossible. So, just go do it. Has he actually said to you, wash and be clean? So Naaman went down and dipped himself 7 times in the Jordan, according to the word of the man of God, and his flesh was restored like the flesh of a little child, right? He was clean. He returned to the man of God and all his company and came and stood before him and said, behold, I know there is now no God in all the earth but in Israel. So accept now a present from your servant. Okay? And as he said, the Lord lives before whom I stand, I will receive none. So Elijah refuses everything, and that actually gets his servant in trouble, but I edited that part out, okay? He urged him to take it, but he refused. And then here's the weird stuff. Naaman said, if not, please let there be given to your servant 2 mules' load of dirt. Why do you want dirt? Because ground matters. Right? From now on, your servant will not offer burnt offerings or sacrifices to any god but the Lord. And realize what this guy has to do. He says it in the next sentence. In this matter, may Yahweh pardon your servant. When my master goes into the house of Ramon to worship, he's leaning on my arm. Naaman has to go in with the king to worship constantly. And Naaman's freaking out about this because his Lord is now Yahweh. But if he's going into Ramon's ground at a worship complex, he's worried Yahweh is going to get mad and either give him leprosy back or worse, right? That's what's going through his head. So I don't know if he's going to take it and, go and sprinkle it in between the stones in the temple just so he makes himself feel better. And not that I'm saying like this is a good request or anything, but it's in his mind that dirt matters. When Daniel was away in Babylon, what did he do 3 times a day? He faced Jerusalem and he prayed. It wouldn't surprise me if Naaman was facing Jerusalem, surrounded in a circle of dirt, from near the Jordan River praying to Yahweh. Would not surprise me in the least. That's Semitic culture to the core. Okay? And he's just, Yahweh, please pardon me. I have to do this or I'm going to get killed. This is a Gentile, by the way. This is a Gentile. He has no allegiance to Yahweh, to God whatsoever. But that's what he thinks. Okay? Ground's important. It represents the domain of those who were given charge. Okay? So now we'll get to the big one. Daniel chapter 10. This is where we see how ground is important because these entities are doing battle with each other. Right? This is Daniel 10. In the 3rd year of King Cyrus of Persia, a word was revealed to Daniel, whose name is Belteshazzar. And the word was true, and it was great conflict. And he understood the word, and he had understanding of the vision. In those days, I, Daniel, was mourning for 3 weeks. This is where we get the Daniel fast, right? The time frame with it. I ate no delicacies, no meat, no wine, aka that's alcohol for everybody. They didn't have much choice back then. Okay, entered my mouth, nor did I anoint myself at all for 3 full weeks. Okay, he went cold turkey. On the 24th day of the 1st month, he was standing at the bank of the great river that is the Tigris. He lifted up his eyes, and behold, a man clothed with linen, fine belt of gold from Uphaz was around his waist. By the way, the picture is very picturesque of the person that appears to John in the book of Revelation, and we know that that person claims to be Jesus Christ. It's the same picture here. John did that on purpose, by the way. He's pulling on Old Testament references constantly, okay? His body was like beryl, his appearance was like lightning, his eyes like flaming torches, right? We sung songs like that. We know that your eyes are a flame of fire, right? Your hair is white as wool. His legs gleamed of burnished bronze, and the sound of his words sounded like a multitude. Okay, now, not that I want to go through all these details, but here is the interesting part. An angel comes in and kind of interrupts this and says, "Fear not, Daniel, for the first day you set your heart to understand this." And remember, he fasted for 21 days to get the understanding of what was happening in his vision. I have come because of your words. Because he prayed, this angel was able to get here and deliver the message. So whenever I say, what should we do because of this stuff pragmatically, I'm suggesting we probably need to take fasting and praying more seriously. We probably need to take fasting and praying more seriously because if fasting and praying unlocks victory in the spiritual realms, when we do it, how many battles, and I think about this for me, you don't have to think about this for you, but I think about how many spiritual victories have been lost because of my selfishness to not actually participate in what prayer is. You don't have to think of it, but that's how I think of it, because that's motivating to me. I want to be in the game. If God has given me an assignment, I want to do it and do it to the best of my ability, and you're going to see why here. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. But here, check this out. 13, the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me for 21 days. Really? Darius is fighting against an angel? No, he's not. But how do we talk about dominion in earth? We have certain terms, right? We have certain terms for offices assigned to people. President, governor, your honor, right? Any judge, school board members. They all have places of authority in our culture. We're used to that. What we're not used to is we're not used to seeing how people in Jesus' time mentioned them. So when they say princes, they're actually talking about spiritual beings that have probably the most authority on the earth. AKA, I think this is the actual Elohim that got assigned to one of Persia's nations. And he's fighting against Michael, one of the chief princes. By the way, Michael is the Elohim in charge of the protection of Israel, Judah. One of the 4 angels mentioned in the Bible. Okay? Oh, we're not done there yet. We have the Prince of Greece, the Prince of Persia, and then Prince Michael, all in the same text line. He's returning to fight with the Prince of Persia. He had to get through the enemy lines, deliver this message, and then get back to the fight. It's going on right in front of our eyes, and we can't see it. That's why most of the source material for this is a book called Unseen Realm. Some people have spiritual gifts of discernment, and I actually have family members who have very, very detail-orientedly laid out them seeing actual demons and angels interact in the same room during worship times. It's there. We might not see it, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist, okay? Angel, it's not a name. It's a position. It's a job description. Satan is not a name. We just kind of gave him the name because it makes sense for us, but Satan is literally Hasatan. In Hebrew, it means the accuser. It's a job description. Cherub is a job description. I told you to remember that one, right? It's the guardian, specifically the guardian of the glory of the Lord. That was Satan's job. And he learned to covet that for himself. That's why he fell, right? They're positions, titles, and I already went through most of our titles that we have today. Could it be that some of the things that we're actually reading in the Bible are actually positions? Not just these euphoric thoughts in our memory that we're trying to metaphorize here? Let's check some of them out. Here's my favorite one, Romans 8. For I am convinced that neither death nor life, nor angels, nor rulers, positions, they're positions, right? With job descriptions, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers. That's another Greek word that's used for a position, okay? Nor height, nor depth, nor anything else in all creation. Half of the stuff on his list were supernatural positions. Ephesians 1. Far above all rule and authority and power and dominion, all four of those words were Greek words for positions in government, whether a local town, whether regional, whether the whole kit and caboodle. Okay? So this would be like me saying, far above all school board members, governors, senators, and presidents. That would be an accurate equivalency translation for us. That's what he's getting at here, and this is all Paul. And Paul, all he's doing is referencing the Old Testament. That's all that's going on here. Here's where Peter goes into it, right? Who has gone into heaven and is at the right hand of God, with angels, with authorities, and with powers, all having been subjected to him, right? He's in charge of all of these entities now. That's what Peter's stating. That's what he's claiming. And everybody in the world has this picture, right? When Paul went to the Areopagus in Athens, he saw that they had a little statue for Yahweh. And he went and he proclaimed to the philosophers of the time, listen, you don't know what you worship. That statue you have there just proves that you know that there is a God among gods, a most high. And I'm here to tell you today that he is Jesus Christ. That's what Paul did. As soon as he was done with the Jews, right, he would wipe the dust. We're going to talk about dust here because remember, dust is what? Ground, and ground is important. I know, Rachel. Time. I'll start reminding you a time during worship sets. Ha, ha, ha. All right. Another thing to remember, 70 or 72 is important. Right? We talked about how many people there were in the Table of Nations. There were 70. So at least 70 Elohim got assigned a job. Then we flip to the New Testament. Luke 10's my favorite one of this. There's several places that you can read and talk about this. Now, it's 72 because the Septuagint has 72 names in the Table of Nations. If you look at the Masoretic text, aka the one that John Tyndale used for his translations, that the King James Bible used for their translations, it's actually 70. Neither here nor there. I'm not trying to say it's a textbook, right? But the detail of 70 or 72 is important. Why? Because Jesus is sending out 72, 2 by 2, ahead of him. Why is that in the Bible? Why does that detail even matter? Why doesn't he just say, I sent out disciples 2 by 2? Then we would have thought it was associated with the ark, right? Because it's the only other place 2 by 2 is in the Bible. But no, 72. If you're a Jewish reader, you're cueing into the fact that 72, the only other place that that number is, or the first place that that number is, was the table of nations. Jesus is signaling that I have come to take back every single inch of ground on this earth. That's what I'm here for. Okay? And we kind of go through this, right? They're not supposed to take any knapsacks. They're supposed to go to the first house and say, peace to the house, and eat whatever they give you and stay there. You're not supposed to leave. Okay? But here's the real interesting part. Whenever you enter a town and they do not receive you, go into its streets and say, even the dust of your town that clings to our feet, we will wipe off against you. Ground is important. Why are we supposed to wipe the dust off our sandals when they don't receive the good news that you no longer have to worship your territorial Elohim because the God of gods came and took care of business and you're free? You're no longer a slave. Oh no, we don't want that. Wipe your dust from your feet and get moving. There's other people that need to hear. And then I like this part. This was actually in last week when we were talking about Sodom and Gomorrah, right? But this is the context that he goes in to say, woe to you, Chorazin, woe to you, Bethsaida, because if you would have, or if Sodom and Gomorrah and Tyre would have seen the miracles in you, they would have repented a long time ago, right? Because Jesus gave the Jewish people every opportunity to see every miracle that could have been done, and they still didn't believe, right? Why in the Beatitudes it says, blessed, or not the Beatitudes, it says other places, blessed are those that have not seen and still believe, right? The 72 returned with joy and said, Lord, even the demons are subject to us in your name. This part's weird. I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. Why would that be the next thing that the author puts that he says? Notice it's in past tense, which doesn't really mean a lot. We even talk about future events in a past tense in context like this. Okay? But this could have been Jesus referring to when he actually saw Satan banished. This could be the future where Jesus actually sees Satan thrown into the abyss. Or, I think, when the 72 came back, and remember, Satan just offered Jesus to govern all the nations of the world on top of Mount Hermon. Right? He paraded all those Elohim in front of him and said, you can have it all. And Jesus said no, right? The 72 came back, and it's signaling to the Jewish reader that Jesus is taking command of the nations. And Satan can't do a thing about it. Can't do a thing about it. Behold, I've given you the authority to tread on serpents, right? That goes back to Eden. You will snap at his heel and he will crush your head. They're referencing that directly right there. And over all the power of the enemy, nothing shall hurt you. Nevertheless, Jesus says, don't rejoice in this. The spirits are subject to you, but rejoice that your names are written in heaven. Okay? Ground matters. We're just thinking about ground. This puts this passage into a much different context for us. Okay? Much different context. Luke 8, when they sailed across the Lake of Galilee, and remember, across the Lake of Galilee was Gentile territory. There's a demon there, Legion. This is one of Dave's favorite stories, right? The demon says, what have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? If I could underline double bold Most High God, this is a demon acknowledging in a Gentile territory that Yahweh owns it all. He owns it all. Right? And then he begs him not to torment him, aka don't send me to the abyss. That's what he wants. Which is kind of ironic anyway, because after he sends them into the pigs, so the story goes, what do? They go plunge off the cliff down into the lake, which is symbolic of the abyss. Okay? Ground matters. Ground matters here too, Pentecost. Kathy's probably the most prolific Pentecost teacher I've ever heard. It's given us a lot of things to think about, but that's not the only perspective of this chapter of the Bible. We know what happens, right? The tongues of fire come down, they start babbling in different languages so that people from these particular places hear the gospel in their native tongue. Okay? From Parthia, from the Medes, the Elamites, residents of Mesopotamia, Judea, Cappadocia, Pontus, Asia, Phrygia, Pamphylia, Egypt, parts of Libya belonging to Cyrene, visitors from Rome, Cretans, and Arabians. Why does that matter? Because if you put it on a map, what does it look like? It looks like most of the table of nations. God sending infiltrators into the kingdom to take it back. He's sending people there ahead of time. Remember, Paul was corrected on occasions. Priscilla and Aquila took Paul aside and said, "Come here, there's a better way to do this." They were in Judah, in Jerusalem that day. They went back to Rome where they lived, and they started a church there. Remember, Paul didn't make the church of Rome. He wrote to the church of Rome and said, "I wish I could have visited you guys before then, but you guys are already up and running," right? That's what's going on here on a deeper level. God is sending out his people that he has given authority to take back the nations. That's what's going on, right? It's most of the 70 or the 72. The resurrection of Jesus, the body of Christ went about reclaiming the nations. That's our job. That's what we have been given to finish. Okay? Now, I'm not about to say, all right, we need to sell everything and we need to move to Indonesia or some foreign island. Okay? Shannon's like, let's go. Right? But let's think about this. In just our little segment of the world, is there places or is there ground where Jesus really isn't the King of Kings and Lord of Lords yet? Or more esoterically, are there spiritual areas in our lives where Jesus Christ isn't the King of Kings and Lord of Lords? Very personal. I get it. Trust me. I've been jabbing myself with this for about 2 months. Okay? Not fun to go through. I get that. But it is necessary, right? Because this brings about repentance. And when we turn to the Father, he never turns away. Right? He never turns away. Remember, we are, Penn State pun intended, in the middle of the greatest turf war ever. It's happening not only here on the ground, but in the dimensions outside and surrounding Earth constantly. And God's going to win the war. So we need to let people know, hey, you got to choose a side. You have to. It matters, right? Paul was the apostle to the Gentiles. This guy's obsessed with getting to one place. He's obsessed with Spain. If you read his stuff, he's all about, oh, I want to go to Spain. I want to go to Spain. Here's the end of his letter to the Romans. All right? This is the reason that I have been often so hindered from coming to you. But now, since I no longer have any room to work in these regions, that's important. Paul thinks he's done ministering to all the other of the 70 nations. But he has one left. And he's dead set on getting there because of his worldview. Okay? I hope to see you in passing as I go to Spain. And then he goes back and he talks about how he's bringing monetary aid to Jerusalem. There was a famine in the area at that time. And Paul was going around saying, look, to you Gentiles who have reaped the benefits spiritually of what your spiritual forefathers have done, please give to them monetarily to help your brother. And that's kind of what's going on here. He gets back and he's like, when I have completed all this, and remember, he goes back to Jerusalem, what happens? Oh, he gets sent to Rome in chains, right? But after that, I'll leave for Spain. Why is he so obsessed with Spain? Let's go back to the map. That's the table of nations. Does everybody see that green area there? That's basically the end of all the people that migrated to Jerusalem that Pentecost. Notice there's one place outside of that realm, Tarshish. It's where Jonah was fleeing to. Traditionally, it's been held as Spain. I'm not going to take it to England or other places where some people think it is, okay? But Paul was dead set on getting there so he could fulfill the Great Commission, making disciples of all 70 nations, right? And now, he was limited by his worldview. We know that's not true. We know there's more people on the earth than just these 70 nations kind of around the Mediterranean Sea. But does the mandate change? And this matters. Remember, we talked about by us doing what we've been assigned to do, that's actually bringing about the kingdom of God faster. By us doing what we're assigned to do, it's actually allowing Jesus to be Lord of every square inch of this place. And one more thing here. Here's why this is important. This is Jesus speaking in Revelation. Okay? He's going through, they're having this issue with sexual immorality and food offered to idols. Sexual immorality, Genesis 6 problem, Genesis 6 rebellion. Food dedicated to idols, Genesis 11 rebellion. And there's threads upon threads of that in your New Testament. I'll let you guys look them up, though. This woman Jezebel, we're calling on the metaphor here, right? Because Jezebel led the nation of Israel into great idolatry, right? She called herself a prophetess, teaching and seducing my servants to practice sexual immorality and to eat food offered to idols, right? We've talked about that. And he's going through and he's saying they need to repent. But then we get here to the end. Only hold fast to what you have until I come. The one who conquers and keeps my words until the end, I will give him authority over the nations. I thought Jesus had authority over the nations. He will rule them with a rod of iron, messianic picture, right? That's Jesus in every single reference before then. But Jesus is saying that to the church at Thyatira now. As it were, earthen pots that were broken into pieces, even as myself have received authority from my Father, and I will give him the morning star. God gave rule of the nations of the earth to the Elohim, and they failed. When the kingdom comes in its totality, the rule and the governance of the earth will be given to God's new family. That's us. And we will be charged with governing territories, and we will be in the hierarchy of the kingdom, and we will have assignments based upon how well we completed our assignments in this life. If you're found faithful, you're going to be in charge of a lot. So let's be faithful.